So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our today's webinar on the topic of decision intelligence through data contextualization. We performed this webinar in close collaboration with our partner firm Contextualisation. So the topic we are talking about today is data, and you can ask yourself, why is data so important? Obviously, there is a lot of conversation going on, and people say, it's the oil of the future banking and the economy as a whole. And if we're honest to each other, we also need to admit that we are probably not good enough to really use the potential of data in this industry, especially in the FS industry. Latest topics such as AI and machine learning are also massively based on data, and therefore we thought we want to dig deeper into this topic and have a close look into these possibilities of the topic of data contextualization. But let me first introduce our lovely panelists and speakers today. So I'm very glad that we have Beate Born with us, who is the Global Head of Business Management at SIX. We have David Power. He's an Executive Director at Julius Baer. He's the Head of Data Governance and the Chief Data Officer for Risk. And we have, last but not least, Ayman Hock. Hopefully I pronounce your name correctly, Ayman. You are the COO and CPO of Contextualisation. Let me quickly introduce on a high level the structure and the agenda of the event. Mark will introduce our latest Capco market survey, which we performed amongst various Swiss clients with a focus on the adoption of RegTech in the FS industry. Then David will stress the importance of data lineage and data quality. Beate will then take over and talk more about the regulatory aspect of data and with a deep dive on ESG. And its handling of data in the future. And last but not least, then Ayman will focus on the topic of contextualization of data for meaningful results. After we went through these kind of short speeches and presentations, we still have probably roughly a 20 minutes Q&A panel where I already can cordially invite people to actively ask questions through the technical possibilities that we have. And with that one, let me hand over to you, Mark, for the first part of our webinar today. Please, Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Ingo, for that. And as Ingo just outlined, it's quite important. You probably see the question pane on the right-hand side of the tool. Please hand in questions. We'll take them up afterwards in the panel. Yes, we are talking today about data and what data means for us and why are we talking about that. More and more we have to answer a lot of questions and make decisions every day, and therefore we need data and we need meaningful data to get this done in the financial industry. So recently we saw a lot of fintech and regtech and insurtech companies, and for those who know me, it's one of my passions to dig deeper into those solutions and hopefully trying to bring on them to clients. However, we discovered that clients, especially in the Swiss market, are a bit hesitant to onboard external solutions. And I asked myself and the team we're working with within Capco, ask ourselves, why is that the case? And then we went out to the clients and we made this little survey to find out the reasons and potential solutions how to overcome this. And during that survey, we had identified 4 major pillars that on the one hand make data really useful and really powerful for your organization, but on the other hand are also the reasons why currently it's a bit, let's say, tranquil on the onboarding of external solutions. And the first thing is outsourcing. There's a long history of Swiss data, and especially Swiss data of personal identificational topics in the news, and Swiss people are general with the Swiss data secrecy topics a bit hesitant to use data outside of Switzerland. So this made outsourcing a bit restrained in the last years. However, there are examples nowadays of virtualized data and virtualization and virtualized tools that enable Swiss companies to use the data outside of Switzerland and still have the full protection of Swiss data requirements. This is the first pillar. Second pillar definitely is governance. And all of us know in different banks the so-called grown historically tools and data solutions. So most of them come through the past, as some banks have merged, some banks have acquired other organizations, and then you just merge the two systems with each other. And also some departments have been using old tools and just want to use them because they have had success with it. So those grown historically systems will definitely not help, as they are very decentralized and they require a lot of amount of work to get the governance right. So one of the pillars, governance, can be overcome potentially with a data lake, but definitely with a clear governance, that it's clear who can access the data at what point of time, what has been done with the data, and then to ask the right questions, which is also one of the key points when you work with data, because only data and the wrong questions won't give you good results. Then the last two pillars are data lineage and quality, where for lineage, a lot of arguments we just use for the governance qualify as decentralized systems do not help for a clear lineage and do not help for good analytics to be done. And especially when it comes to AI, lineage and governance need to be in place. And for me, the paramount pillar definitely is data quality, as I'm a passionate chef, as some of you might know, and as in food and data, quality is key, because if you use poor quality in the beginning, you will only get poor results. So on this little analogy, I'd like to hand over to you, David, and please all listen closely, as one or the other have experienced definitely one or the other issue of those pillars, and David will now deep dive on lineage and quality for us. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much, Mark. I was asked to talk about data lineage and data quality, and what I've thought I would do is to think about it in the context, because when we think of data quality, when we think about data lineage, there's a binding component of that, which is our metadata, because this is really talking about all of the things that we know about our data. I know we know metadata is data about data, but when we stop and think a little bit more about that, it's, well, what do we want to know about the data? It's a piece of data, we're going to use it. Well, who cares what data or information we have about it? Well, actually, we care a whole lot, because for a start, is it the right data? Does it come from the right place? Is it of good quality? Is it a secret piece of data? Who created it and who's going to use it? So all of these metadata components, and this word metadata binds all of the things that we talk about in data. Even when we talk about data lineage, we're talking about, where did the data come from? What process did it undergo? How is that data mapped through the organization? So when we think about these things, they all come under this same area of data management, data governance, and we're really talking about our metadata. So data lineage is a mapping of our data, the journey through the organization. That's where it comes from. And where it comes from is really, really important, because when we're using a piece of data, we want to know that it came from the correct place, that somebody input it in the correct way, that it's come from a source that isn't duplicated somewhere else with some other types of data. We want to know this so that when we have projects which say, how are we going to get more data? We don't want to talk to our colleagues and say, hey, this customer data, what system should I go to get this? And you talk to one colleague and they'll say one thing, and another colleague will say another thing. We want a definitive place where we go to look up that piece of data, understand our data dictionary, understand our lineage, and see the exact source where we can get it. And then it's a trusted source. And trust, when we talk about the private banking environment and wealth management, we can use that word in so many different places, and it is so important to us. When we consider this metadata and we think about our data lineage, we then need to move on to talk about, well, different types of metadata and different types of lineage are going to be important to us at different points in time. And we need to understand the balance between a really, really, really detailed lineage and understand a higher level of lineage. That needs to be done between that balance needs to be understood, because in some cases, if we're going to resolve a data quality issue and want to find out what's happening, well, perhaps right along of the chain of events, right down through the systems, we want to know where something might have gone wrong. But if we want to know the general path of data through the system, then we need to look at it differently. That's why we've got different types of lineage. We've got lineage where we look at a business object, which is a cluster of types of data that are bundled together in a correct way because they share a common journey through the systems. And there's data element lineage, where every single piece of data element, we see the mapping of that through the systems and where it's transformed. Now, this usefulness conversation is really important, because if you do one type of lineage and you want it for another use, you're going to have a problem. My experience in using data lineage went through the BCBS 239 program right at the beginning in one of our larger banks. And at the time, as things evolved and understanding evolved on how data lineage is undertaken, the regulators wanted us to do something at a very, very, very detailed level, and it became paper-based. You know as well as I do, you're not going to find out a big folder and work through all of the nitty-gritties in a paper format. So therefore, it's very important to have visualization for lineage, so that you can open up a system and you can see the flow of the data through the system at a high level. You need to be able to click on an area where you want to drill down for detail, and then find the more information about that. So that talks about the layers of metadata, the visualization, starting large and working down small, which is very, very important. This can also be tied to our data quality. As with Mark Oliver, I am very passionate about data quality. If you read or watch my LinkedIn videos, you'll see I've got a number of data quality components there. It's very important for people to understand, because in some contexts, people think that if we begin to raise data quality issues, we're showing something bad and we should maybe hold off. But it's that transparency allows us to do things sometimes for free. So if we map all of our data quality issues and understand them, there may be programs already in place in our organization that could fix them if these were part of their requirements. So it's very, very important to bring that transparency. It's very important also to monitor our data quality. But first, my belief is you've got to get a lay of the land. You've got to understand about your data and where it is. And that's actually where lineage comes in as well, because if you can map a data quality issue in a system that holds the data lineage at the same time, you can already see all along that journey of data where our particular issues are and where our concentrations of issues are, so you can pinpoint the investment that needs to be done. So there's a great bond between the metadata there in terms of data lineage and data quality. The uses of this data lineage can be quite significant. So you can use this for impact analysis. If you know where your data is coming from and the transformations that it's happening along the way, you can change something in a test environment, see the impact through the journey of making that change, and understand your impact analysis from there. That's very, very important from a risk management perspective, especially when we're looking at the models that we use for analyzing risk management. When we look at data protection information, more and more that is critical. If we want to understand that a particular piece of data is a personal piece of data and needs to be protected in that way, well, wouldn't we like to see what's happening to that piece of data along the way? If it's being stored in places where we didn't know it should be stored along the way, if it's been amended, if it has been augmented, what's happening to that personal data? And more through regulation, that's going to become very important, whether that's GDPR, whether it's the California equivalent, whether it's the different regulations that FINMA have introduced for data secrecy and data privacy as well. That's going to become more and more important as we move forward. We mentioned issue resolution, and we talked about data integrity. So assuring data integrity all through that chain is very, very important. Regulations I mentioned as well. Well, for BCBS 239, lineage is more or less mandated. It's just at the different levels that it can be discussed, how that can be brought forward, and what's more important for different areas, for the uses that it's being made for. In a private banking environment, this is where it's important for us in this context. Our customers and our relation with them are super important. And that's built on trust. And that trust is sacrosanct. Data integrity is super important for that trust. The use of that person's personal data is super important for that trust. So with lineage and data quality hand in hand, we can assure our partners and our customers where their data is being used, how it's been augmented, or if it's been augmented, or if it's been changed. and the quality of the data all along the decision tree. Besides their personal data, when we have a conversation with one of our partners, one of our customers, and we give them advice, or we talk to them about their portfolio, or we talk to them about the risk that they're taking in their portfolio, or the options that they have available, if our data is incorrect in some way, and we have a conversation with them about that investment, about their status, about their standing, and it's wrong, suddenly that trust is gone. Because if data can be wrong in one area, well, perhaps it's wrong in all of the other areas. So we need to ensure that that data integrity is there through our data quality issue management and data quality monitoring, and that we can see the data all through the chain through our lineage. I'll leave you with this. For me, if data is the key to maintain our client relationships, then data governance, data management, data lineage, and comprehensive metadata is the metal that gives that key the strength to open the lock. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, David. And I'll directly pass over the ball to Beate.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. David, that was fantastic. And it actually ties in very well what I'm going to talk about, because you talked a lot about the concept of data and how we use data and the trust in data and the quality of it. And I want to dive into ESG data and basically walk through that as a case study, right? How do we deal with data and what are the issues, even if we, if we try to do everything right and we try to have assurance of the quality of the data and so on. And I think ESG is one of those things that, yes, it's very important. A lot of people see it as a trend, and a lot of people are struggling with it, especially banks are struggling with managing the data around ESG. And ESG used, the same word is used, but we also use sustainability, and sustainability doesn't really have a definition. The Brundtland Commission defined it back in the day, I think it was 87, and said, it's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is conveniently vague, right? It means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For example, 1 in 5 people lives in poverty. About 60 million kids are not getting access to education. Greenhouse gas emissions have risen by 50%. Water scarcity affects 40% of the world population. Gender equality is an issue. 40% of oceans are affected by pollution, depleted fisheries, and so on. So all of those topics are essentially sustainability. And when you're now going back to the data, how do you measure it? All right. So the UN has tried to start to measure it. They've defined 17 goals, 169 targets to measure those goals by, and then 232 indicators. And that's on a country level. That's not even on a company level. Obviously, we have to break this down to company level in order to reach those targets, because the companies are usually what drives negative or positive impact in the sustainability space. But just by looking at that, 17 goals, 169 targets, 232 indicators, you realize how complex this is. And all of these 17 goals are interconnected with one another. So again, if you were to take an equity and you wanted to assess its level of sustainability, is it good or bad, you would have to take poverty and gender equality and oceans and climate into account, and then look at how those interact with one another, and how do you find a data set that you can trust that gives you that information, right? Now, why do we even need sustainability data? I mean, we could say, well, we're banks, we don't really need to worry about this, or we're in financial services, we're companies, we leave this up to the UN. Now, since the Kyoto Protocol, and that's a good 30 years ago, we've been trying to limit carbon emission, and we've been trying to measure it, and it hasn't really worked. So at first the idea was to focus on transparency. We need as much data as we can on this. We need to publish data. That didn't work. We haven't reduced carbon emission. We're now looking at comparability of that data, which is a good next step. But that then resulted into a plethora of voluntary standards. I mean, you would know them: the TCFD, the GRI, the SASB, the CDP. you name it. They're all voluntary frameworks that tell you how to disclose your sustainability data. And those frameworks bring the real economy to publish their ESG data, which is then picked up by the banks. But since we can't, it's not comparable. Those voluntary frameworks are not comparable. It's again really hard to make sense of it all and to avoid greenwashing, essentially. Now, what's then happened is the EU has decided that the financial services industry should be the gatekeeper for sustainable investments, because what's happened is that those 17 goals are essentially not reachable with public funding. So we've got 150 to 160 billion that are available. However, we would need several trillion. That number ranges from 2 to 7 trillion, and that you will only get through the real economy or through the private assets or private asset investments. So it was decided that the financial services industry has to make sure that sustainable assets are channeled. Private assets are channeled into sustainable investments, and hence has come up with regulations to make sure that that happens. And that's why we're now faced with that whole EU regulatory regime. So starting with the non-financial reporting directive, that's for actual companies that then have to disclose data that's used by the SFDR, which is the sustainable finance regulation that is for banks, basically forcing banks to disclose on product and entity level on the level of sustainability of their products. And all of that, I mean, we can only, as banks, we can only base that assessment on the real economy data. And the problem with that whole system is that it's an immature regulatory system. So it's immature in terms of timing, because the actual real economy hasn't been forced to publish that information yet. And banks are already forced to publish their assessments, which then comes down to estimates, best efforts. And here you have it again. You cannot trust the data, which is what David was talking about earlier. You've got greenwashing. You've got companies, large companies that have a lot of resources to put towards that direction. They potentially are assessed better than those that don't have those resources for the reporting, but they're actually doing better. So we have that whole problem there. Also, it's not mature in the sense of coverage. If we look at the EU taxonomy, which is essentially the language that defines what sustainability is for all other EU regulations, so the SFDR and the NFRD, that covers only climate so far. And it only covers 2 out of 6 climate goals. So it doesn't cover E, S, and G. It only covers the E and only a small percentage of the E. Again, so you have 11% of ESG covered with this regulation. What about the rest? What about the social aspects, the governance aspects, and so on? So there are massive issues there, and a couple of other topics around data that I see as challenges I want to quickly mention as well. So we've talked about the immature regulatory spectrum. We've talked about the misalignment of standards. And there are 2 other ones. One is the materiality concepts. Materiality is essentially defines what is important to be disclosed. And there are 2 types of materiality: financial materiality, and then there's the stakeholder or environmental materiality. So what's the ESG risk for the value of my asset or of my company? That's financial materiality. How can that affect me negatively? And the other financial or stakeholder materiality is how do I affect my environment or the actual environment negatively? And if that is not aligned, if you're not sure what you're actually looking for, then you have a disconnect. The TCFD, for example, looks at financial materiality. And a lot of companies use their TCFD disclosure to say, hey, I'm sustainable, I'm doing TCFD. Not true. The EU regulatory regime uses dynamic materiality. So it looks at both. It looks at the financial aspect. Am I going to be a healthy company with these ESG risks? Yes or no? And that's not a new concept. That's been done for a long time, that modeling. And it also looks at how am I doing within my stakeholder base. So that needs to be aligned, obviously, to make sense of that data. And then the stakeholder matrix, that's what I call it. We have many different users and producers of that data in this whole ecosystem. So we've got obviously the real economy, we've got the banks, we've got the data providers, we've got the stock exchanges, we've got we've got the UN that comes up with data, we've got the WEF, we've got those organizations as well, and all of them have different goals and different purposes and different viewpoints. And that confuses everybody again. So if you're a financial services professional and you really just want to be told what to do, just tell me, what data am I supposed to gather? How am I supposed to report it? And what's my target? Where do I need to get to? Nobody can give you the answer. And that's where this whole system is immature, and that's where we have to work through now. And I'm going to close it with that and hand over to Imam for some more data contextualization.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting listening to the discussion around the lineage, the governance and the consent of how you use the data, and then that plethora of data sources that exist in this world of ESG. So it presents banks with lots of challenges around the data. What's the quality? How do I join it together? How do I get a view? But ultimately, everybody's doing the same thing. What is the decision I'm going to make off the back of what I've done with this data? And this is what it's all about. So I'll take you on a little bit of a journey, I guess, of how and where we've been working with banks across the globe, people like HSBC and Standard Chartered and many others in Europe and elsewhere. And really, the journey started quite often with compliance. So get all your data in one place, dump it into some sort of big data lake or something like that, so that we can actually get visibility of exactly what's going on. The first challenge here is data in a data lake is great because it's quick to get it there. You avoid this complicated ETL process of mapping it into formats. And data lakes, in a way, are nice because you're not preempting the use cases, because new use cases crop up all the time. But the question then becomes, how do you get some rigor and control over that data lake? Who's using it? What are they using it for? How do we serve it out? And how do we join it up? And that's where the real challenge lies. So what we've been doing with these institutions is we start off on the compliance side, but very soon they realize that all that data is available for other use cases, which give them other business value. So what then happens is people start thinking, okay, how can I turn what is just a data lake into something that's a true data utility? And by having a proper data utility, I know how all that data is connected together. I understand the quality, I understand the uses, the consents. I know who's accessed it and what use cases I'm using it for. And that's where the banks have been using our software, usually on their premise. Obviously in Switzerland, the whole cloud thing and all of that's a little complicated, but typically on premise, to create a data utility that can underpin other use cases through context. So let me give you an example. When you're dealing with a customer, they go through many different processes and cycles. You're prospecting them. You're then onboarding them, which probably involves KYC. You might be doing things like fraud checks and those sorts of things when you're onboarding them. You're then monitoring them throughout their life cycle. The customer, whether they're a high net worth individual, whether they're commercial, retail, or whatever it is, they have or use products from the banks, whether it's investments, whether it's some form of lending, whatever else. And they're interacting and transacting. So you're monitoring them for multiple things again, potentially fraud, hopefully not fraud, and you don't have fraudulent customers. Changes in KYC status. Somebody's just become a director of a new company, the company's in a certain country. Do you need to trigger a re-review for risk or not? Potentially you're trying to position products with them. What are they doing with you? What are their transactions telling you about what product you could position with them? Do they need foreign exchange or FX hedging? Do they need some other sort of product? So you're continuously monitoring them, and then at some point, potentially, you might need to consider whether you're offboarding them. What order do you offboard them? What are all the parts of their estate that you should offboard? So I've given you a number, if you think of this as a matrix, a number of phases. They're the columns from prospect to offboard. And I've also told you about KYC, which is a silo. anti-money laundering, fraud checking, customer intelligence, cross-sell, upsell, prospecting, credit and credit risk, for instance, if you're lending to them. These are all processes, and at every intersection there's about 20 different intersections on that matrix. You're making a decision. Question is, how do you marshal your data? What data can you use? How do you overcome data quality to make each of those decisions better in a way that is servicing those customers who want to be serviced through a digital channel automatically? They're expecting decisions in seconds, not knowing about it next week, or through a relationship manager, or whatever other mechanism you'll be servicing those customers. So how do you make those decisions work? A lot of people create models, they create scorecards, they bring data together. And we call that decision intelligence. In fact, if you go and chat to Gartner about it, they'll talk about decision intelligence being the new business intelligence. Business intelligence was about, things like Power BI, Tableau, business objects, Cognos, create nice graphs, allow people to look at the data and make a decision themselves. Decision intelligence, let the computer make the decision where it can, 90% of the time, or augment the decision or inform it. And if it can't do that, then refer it to a person to make the ultimate decision. Now, the reason why this panacea of AI and this automated decisioning hasn't worked that well is there's all of those gotchas. Is it accurate enough? Is it transparent? Can I explain what it's doing? Will the customer be comfortable with it? All of these different issues and problems. So the first thing you need to do to make those models more effective is provide them with context. Because you can't make, even we as humans don't make a decision without context. So you can't expect a computer to do that. And context is having all the data that pertains to that person or organization together in one place. We call it entity resolution. It's a complex problem. It needs to overcome things like data quality issues, missing data, and so on and so forth. So that's the first step. The second step is to understand that customer or business within their network. So if you take a high net worth individual, chances are they may be a director of a company. They may have created their wealth through businesses. So you need to understand that network. Who are the other directors of that company? Who does that company transact with? What is its business like? What is that other individual's other interests? So you need to create a network within your data. Once you've done that, you can then apply the models and make the decisions. So I can give you a very quick example. Imagine if you were lending to a company like Contexa. So we bank with HSBC. They want to lend to us. Typically off the back of a scorecard, they might lend us 50K. That's it. What they want to do is lend us up to $1 million off the back of a scorecard. Their processes today, though, wouldn't be adequate to do that because their scorecard doesn't have enough data. They rely on their relationship managers to provide a view of the management and collect some of the data. Now imagine if you could bring this together and you could automatically understand our corporate ownership structure. You could see I'm a director on the board, my colleague Vishal Maria. You could see that Nick Donofrio is our chairman. He was on the board of Bank of New York Mellon and Liberty. Simon Collins was chairman of KPMG, and so on and so forth. So straight away you get a view of our management structure and quality. Equally, HSBC can see our transactions, so they can see our supply chain. They can very quickly ascertain that we are not beholden to the airline or travel industry at the moment, clearly a problem in the world of COVID. They can see who our customers are, all the big banks, government departments, EU, US government, etc., that pay us money, how regularly they pay us money, and then who our suppliers are, typically large consulting firms like Capco, Big Four, and so on and so forth. So that data going to the model can make a far better credit risk decision, or a decision about what's the next best product we need. Maybe we've raised a bunch of cash, it's in one currency, but they can see from the data we have operating entities in multi countries, they should offer us an FX hedging service, for instance. So data has the ability to automatically, at every one of those points on that matrix, throughout the customer life cycle, across the silos of customer intelligence through to money laundering, to enhance those decisions. And that really comes down to getting your data joined together, entity resolution, created into networks, and pushed into models. And then if the model can't make the decision, you push it out to a person who reviews the outcome and makes a decision. So that's what it's all about. And that's where the big banks are heading to. They're creating data utilities with all those functions and features, so they know they've got consent under control. They know what's going in, which third-party data sets, what's ESG data, and they have full control over that. And that can then be used multi-use case. So that's the approach and vision that we're seeing in the market. So hopefully that's a useful bit of insight.
Perfect. Thank you a lot to all three of you. Setting this into a perfect frame, and we have first questions coming in. So I'd like to ask the first one to you, David. What tools did Julius Baer have to rolled out for data lineage and quality review?
So the tools that we use our Calibra system for most of our data management. So our data management and data governance includes our data dictionaries, our metadata management, and the work that we will also do on lineage. From a data quality issue management perspective, we are working currently also with Calibra to build in the data quality issue management tool into the current offering that they have. We talked to them about that extensively because I personally see huge value in having it in the same place and interconnected. As I mentioned earlier when we talked about lineage, if you can understand a data quality issue, understand the metadata associated with it, and see it on a lineage profile, then it's far more powerful than seeing it independently and on its own. In terms of our where we hold our data, where we analyze our data, we have a data platform that we have built internally, super platform with great analytical capabilities. It has all of the right data protection in place and all of the right data quality in place to assure our customers that the data is handled in the right way and they can continue to have trust in the information that we're giving them.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Then a first question towards you, Beate. How does ESG data help to drive banks' business?
Well, that's a very good question. Look, I think the main misunderstanding about ESG data is that it is either a regulatory topic, or it's a sales topic, or it's an investment topic, or it's a risk topic, right? I think the most important part to this question is, what's my purpose in this space as a bank? Where do I want to position myself? Right. So it's the whole question around, do I want to commit or do I want to comply? And that means, do I just want to offer some sustainable products as much as necessary, as much as my clients need, or do I want to really position myself in the market as the sustainability leader, the one to go to satisfy my need for oceans products, right? Do I just want to do the reporting that's required by the regulator, or do I want to add SASB and TCFD and all of those to the list? Because then, I really make sure that as a whole, I'm a sustainable company. I make sure in my lending department, I have no fossil fuels in my lending portfolio, for example. Right? Those are all things that you need to consider. So when you move out to the market and you say, I want to be the driver in sustainability, and we see this quite a bit. A lot of companies are doing this, and I don't think they're actually realizing what that might mean once a third party comes looking into it. And a third party might be the media, it might be some activist organization, or it might be an auditor. And that's something you need to be really conscious of, right? So that goes back to the trust question. You don't have to be a leader, but you just have to do it right. Once you lose the client's trust, and you're saying you're doing one thing and then some scandal comes up and you're actually doing another, then you lose trust. And then obviously the obvious answer to your question is, well, sustainable products at the moment are very profitable. So the quicker you get into that space, the more demand you will have and the more return you will have, right? But I don't think that is actually the sustainable, as in the long-term answer to that question. So how can you get to the forefront? By really thinking about where you want to be, having an action plan and doing it properly in all the different areas. And it has to be the same exact approach throughout the entire organization. Research, investment, marketing, philanthropy, all of that has to just line up entirely.
Thanks a lot for those insights, Beate. Imam, you have been talking about data lakes before, and there's a question from the audience. How can a data lake help an organization to organize data better?
So I think a data lake in its rawest form actually is just a dumping ground for data. So what you need to do is create on top of that a data utility. And some people use a term that it creates what they call a data fabric. And what that brings is the tools and capabilities of things like the governance products. It joins the data up and deals with the quality. So it produces a single views across the data within that environment that are maintained and updated. It produces the network views of the interrelationships and so on and so forth. And then it can serve up that data in any form. So if you're in marketing and you say, I need a single view of this customer because we're trying to do some sort of a campaign, the system needs to be able to respond by sending the marketing safe single view of that customer's data. Now that may remove other data. So the security is managed and the consent is managed within that layer. Now, equally, although that may be serving those up as API calls for give me a network around a high net worth individual that shows me his colleagues for, I don't know, some sort of referral campaign, you also want to be able to get the data in batch form because data scientists may want to call it out, do some work, and develop a model. Now, the important thing here again is that that environment prepares the data accordingly, provides it, tracks it, and then removes it at the end of that process, or it keeps it as an updated repository for that analyst to work on, because you can't allow data to come out of date either. You know, that is a major issue, again, from the GDPR compliance point of view, if you built something on out-of-date data. So the data lake needs the appropriate software on top of it. It's not just like a Hadoop platform or a Spark or whatever else. It needs to be able to offer all of these capabilities, API-driven requests, resolution, data quality, so on and so forth, governance, etc. So Calibra, as mentioned earlier, we partner with Calibra and work with those guys, amongst others, in that same environment. Whereas we actually end up enforcing the security model on the data, so people can't get the wrong stuff out of the data lake.
Thank you, Imam, for stressing the importance of keeping a data lake clean, not to have a data swamp. Next question would be for you, David, again. You have been mentioning metadata, and the audience like to know, as a lot of companies are collecting data and having a lot of data pipelines in, and isn't metadata the missing key to integration, especially to receive more transparency? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It's like having a box. You know, if somebody gives you a box, that's interesting. But should I even open the box? What's in the box? Who gave me the box? What should I do with the box? Data is nothing unless we know about the data. And when you look at a data out of context, you have to have all of the information around it before you can do something with it. Again, the box, am I even allowed to open the box? So we're talking about security, we're talking about content, we're talking about quality, we're talking about lineage, about usefulness. All of this is all about the data. And unless we know our data, we literally cannot use our data. So metadata is very, very broad, and it covers most of the topics actually that we've talked about today, because it talks about, well, is the data sustainable? Does it come from a sustainable source? Is it related to something that is sustainable or damaging the environment? Does it come from a terrorist organization? Does it have the right quality associated with it? Does it have integrity as it moves down the line? So the ability to see metadata and manage metadata in an organized and structured and automated as much as possible way is critical for our management of our data. And if we look at that as something that is underlying, below the water, that people don't see very much, remember all of the things that we talked about afterwards, the cool stuff, the artificial intelligence, the natural language processing, the deep analytics. All of those, again, are not very useful unless we've done the underlying work to understand our data and know our metadata.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, David, for putting this into context. Another question towards you, Beate. How can data management help me maintain compliance?
Yes, I mean, we've, especially looking at it from financial services, and I've been on the implementing side of that for more than a decade now, actually. I think what we need to get to is a sort of a standardization together with flexibility in the data, right? So if you know what you're going to be asked from the regulator, for example, and especially if you're a global organization, then you will find that you have to deal with different regulations and they all look at it a little bit differently, right? But if you have the data in a format that is flexible in the way that you can report it to ESMA and you can report it to the SEC and you can make sense of it, and it's not sort of, you know, very static, then you will have an easier time going through with that. But I think on the regulator side as well, there'll be some alignment fairly soon. So we've seen this, you know, going through MiFID with transaction reporting and the transparency reporting that we've had to do. It's been very hard. It's been very hard to meet these requirements because they were very specific. But as soon as you manage to digitize the data on both sides, it becomes a lot easier, right? So, I mean, data management is essentially compliant. If you do it properly, then you will be compliant. If you don't do it properly, then it's all a big mess, and nobody can follow what you're reporting, what you're basing your analysis on. So it does make sense to, for one, not have all these different silos of data, and also to do it properly from the get-go, implement solutions that are flexible in the sense that you can use it for one thing, but later on you can use it for another.
Thanks a lot. Another question coming from the audience to you, Imam, is how important is it in today's world that organizations design, build, and a data-centric landscape?
I think it's critical to get your data thinking sorted out up front. Historically, in the world of IT, it was the technical architects and the CTOs who worried about how all the components and systems fitted together. But more and more, because data is so critical, really the chief data architects and the CDOs and even the CIOs need to be thinking from a data point of view. Just think about the ESG data question. You're talking about, I don't know, 30 plus sources. Within the bank, there's probably 10 different places you want to use that data. Now, are you going to do, 30 times 10 separate integrations of data across all those systems? It simply doesn't make sense. So you need to think about that data fabric layer and say, all my external data is coming into one place. It's getting joined with my customer data or my relationship and counterparty data. And that's being made available then back to all of the other use case applications. Otherwise, there's just almost no chance you can keep track of lineage and you end up with a massive bowl of spaghetti integration. But if you get it right, I think it enables a huge amount. So you have to have the mentality of what is my data utility? How am I going to create that data fabric? And how is that then going to feed all the other systems? I've unfortunately seen banks slice and dice to death by data providers, where they sell a bit to that department of the bank, a bit to this country, a bit to, and they add it up, and a big bank might be spending 1.5 billion euros a year on third-party data because they haven't brought it centrally and created competition between the data providers, and they end up with, you know, procurement stuff going on all the place, and it's just an enormous thing to manage if you let it get out of control. So data is critical and central. Now it's a hard lesson for the board to learn because every individual department wants to build its own app as soon as possible, get it live, its own, you know, and you're under that continuous pressure, but it gets out of control very quickly.
Thank you. And in the light of time, one last question to you, David. What kind of data does a private bank need to analyze?
All data, really, when you think about it. We want to know our customers very, very well for their own benefit. We want to know what types of things that they are interested in, whether they're interested in certain types of products or certain type of risk profiles. We want to understand their own organizations and how they work, and perhaps it's a family office and how the family works together. What we want to do is we want to ensure that we go beyond wealth, that we are able to add value beyond this wealth for our customers in a way that's sustainable also. So when we think about that, all of the information around our customers, their interest in sustainable products, for example, and how we can understand their needs even more. We need to understand then also from a regulatory perspective, a risk perspective, what's going on with their data within the bank. So the things that they are taking for granted that we are doing in the background is we're ensuring that our bank is dealing with the right people in the right way, that we're not opening ourselves to scandal by dealing with third parties that are in the wrong space at the wrong time. So to understand our data within the bank is to understand ourselves and how we operate, and to understand our customers. So for us, it's important to analyze and understand all of our data.
Thanks for those closing words, David. We have a few more questions coming in, and we'll take them up and we try to answer them in the afterwards. And with those words, I'd like to hand over back to you, Ingo, for a few closing words.
Thank you. Wow, that was a quite impressive round, and I only can thank you, for your passionate, for your crisp, and for your direct contributions this afternoon or this morning. So what I take away is, the importance is huge, the potential is very big, and I think the technical possibilities that are given to us nowadays, also with the latest use of technology, is enormous. So let's continue on that journey. It's probably also fair to say we are just about in the middle of a journey. I don't think the industry is there, but if we continue in that direction, we are definitely in a good way. With that one, again, thank you. I know some of us have joined today from very special environments. Some of us are today in very special moments in their career. So really a special thank you for making it nevertheless. And with that one, thank you to the participants. And hopefully we see some of you again in some of our upcoming events, and then hopefully also physical soon. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thanks, Ingo.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Oh,
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.